The Titanic carried 3,300 passengers and crew. Nearly half of them lost their lives on the night of April 14, 1912. But the stories of the Titanic live on. On the ship were millionaires, artists, fashionistas, bakers, cookers, musicians, doctors, and con men. These are their stories. Welcome to the Last Night on the Titanic podcast. The Titanic was a luxury vessel and the largest movable man-made object of its time. It sank on April 15, 1912, off the coast of Newfoundland in the North Atlantic. Over 1,500 of the 2,240 passengers and crew lost their lives in the disaster. The Titanic is considered a cautionary tale of the arrogance of builders, that their creation could be completely impervious to harm. And it was also a perfect storm of events that happened at once. You had some of the wealthiest and most powerful people on board at the time, like John Jacob Astor, the hotel magnate. The founder of Macy's was there. You had some of the most prominent fashion designers on board, aristocratic families. And as it's been depicted in films, a lot of class conflict came about with the first, second, and third class passengers. But beyond just a story of disaster, I think that the Titanic story still draws an emotional response from people a century after its sinking because it shows some of the best and worst of humanity. You have people acting bravely and with perfect calmness. They're laying their lives down so that others can live, knowing they're only a few minutes away from death. Then you have others who act cowardly and are willing to shoot others so they can get their place on the lifeboat. I mention this all because this is a preamble for a series I'm going to do on the Titanic with a co-host, Veronica Hinke. Veronica is the author of a forthcoming book called The Last Night on the Titanic, Unsinkable Drinking, Dining, and Style. In Veronica's book, she chronicled dozens of stories of those who were on the Titanic, and she also tried to painstakingly recreate menus and recipes, meals, cocktails, and drinks that would have been on the ship to really get a sense of what the lived experience was like there. What we're going to be doing in this series is spending each episode focusing on a person or a group of people and seeing what their lives were like before they got to the Titanic, whether they survived or not, and what their experience was like when the ship was going down. We'll look at bakers, artists and writers, popcorn vendors, cooks, helpers, those who rescued others who were going down with the ship and laid down their own lives, like Molly Brown, trendsetters, fashionistas, hoteliers, the musicians, those who played as the ship was going down, doctors, and also swindlers, those who were preying on wealthy widows, hoping that they could get a place in their will. So we're going to be looking at all these different people, and something that Veronica did was pair a recipe of food or drink with each class of people, and something that actually would have been served on the Titanic in order to approach history from a culinary perspective. And this is an idea that really isn't that far out there. I had a guest on the show about a year ago, Ken Albala, who studied cuisine and history in Roman, medieval, and Renaissance times, and has made and consumed food of that time period, and how it gave him perspective on what it would be like to be a medieval peasant when you were eating bread with coarse grain. Well, Veronica says the same thing. She says when she ate the tripe soup that a third-class passenger would eat, or when she had the desserts that a Edwardian lady would consume in first class, she describes it as helping her transport her back to the Titanic and at least get a small sense of what it would be like to be there. So in the show notes for this episode, we'll have the full recipe that we mentioned in the recipe spotlight. So if you really want to dive in and recreate in your own small way what it was like to be on the Titanic, you can at least do that with some of the food and drink we mentioned. So I hope you enjoyed this series with Veronica Hinke. Thanks for listening to the Last Night on the Titanic podcast. To listen to all the episodes in the series, go to lastnightonthetitanicpodcast.com. There you'll also find show notes, biographical profiles of the passengers and crew on the Titanic, and recipes for all the recipe spotlights that we do in the series. One last thing, if you like the show, please rate and review it on the podcast listener of your choice. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.